Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello, and welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast about building and growing a creative online business without relying on social media, and instead centering everything you do in radical generosity and energetic sovereignty and rest. Because today on the podcast, we are talking all about joyful, restorative, sustainable rest practices. I am your host, Amelia Freebie, and in this episode, I am joined by the one and only Jordan Maney. Jordan is the radical joy coach and creator of the RestLab. Through her facilitation and coaching, she helps people who give a damn, which I think is you, dear listener, learn the radical practice of rest so they can reclaim their joy and sustain their advocacy. Jordan has been featured in New York Magazine, Yahoo, Attention, Oprah Magazine, and Martha Stewart Living. You can find her resting with friends, family, and her sassy dog, Duchess, in San Antonio, Texas. And today on the podcast, Jordan is here to help me learn how to rest, maybe, I hope. We talk about how to rest when, one, you do love the work that you do because it's your creative practice, perhaps even your calling. And also, two, you need to make money because we still live under late stage capitalism and have bills to pay that only seem to go up. And three, also, the world is on fire, as people say. It's a tough year, and there's so much to do. There's so much to fight against. There's so much to push back against. There is so much work that's needed in the world to envision what comes next. So with that swirl of things, with loving your work, with needing to make money, with seeing how much work is needed to change our social and political reality, how do we rest? That is kind of the question that I pose to Jordan in this episode. And wow, does she have profound and beautiful answers for us. So if you're exhausted, if you're burned out, if you're tired, and especially if you're tired of being tired, this episode is for you. I hope you will tune in, enjoy the conversation, and then join Jordan in her RestLab 101 offering for support, recentering rest in your life, and slowing down as 2025 comes to a close. There's going to be more to do next year, my friends. So how can we find a moment of pause, of peace, and of joy before we dive back in? Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Thank you to Jordan for joining me. Let's dive in, shall we, to my conversation with the radical joy coach, Jordan Maney. Hi, Jordan. Welcome to Off the Grid.
How are you doing? I am so excited to be here.
I am also feeling very excited. I know that folks can't see our screens, but there's a lot of glowy, smiling energy happening. So I'm sure that will permeate the pod today. I really want to have a conversation about rest. And I want to have a conversation about rest in the way that you talk about rest, where it's not just log off or take a nap, although maybe also log off and take a nap, but where we're really bringing in a multifaceted approach and an awareness of why it's so hard to rest in all of the aspects of our world, both our personal lives and political events and structural systemic oppression. All those things make it hard to rest. I'm looking at myself at the end of this year and noticing that I am tired and I am overworked and I am overwhelmed and I still can't stop working. And I'm hopeful that in this conversation today, we can really speak about how to actually rest as we get to the end of the year. So thank you for being here. Thank you for offering us your wisdom. And Could you kick us off by sharing your definition of rest and how you developed this?
Yes. Okay. So I transitioned into this work between 2020 and 2021. And I think it was the tail end of 2021. I'd been talking a lot about rest, where it finally kind of came to me while I was eating something. So you'll see why. So I say rest is the energy E, attention A, and time T that you return to yourself. And I used to say that you give to yourself, but I shifted the word to return because I think it implies one, an intentionality. I think it implies also that you should be conscious of the energy, attention, and time you give to others, other people, other causes, communities, issues, work, and also the idea that like you want to begin to build that neural pathway in practice of making sure that it comes back to you. Most of the folks that I talk to care. I say people who give a damn, bleeding hearts, people who care in some capacity, either professionally, maybe they work in nonprofits, or just like personally, right? It can be really difficult when you're so good about caring about other people to remind yourself to care about yourself. And in fact, you're not really giving true care to other people if you can't receive care for yourself. That's another podcast episode. But yes, rest is the energy, attention, and time that you return to yourself. And I love this definition. I think this definition definitely helps people reframe what rest is away from simply taking a nap, simply going to bed at a different time, into something that is one, restorative, and two, I know this word is kind of charged for people, and I'm going to allow everybody who's listening to come at it however they come at it. And maybe I'll give another term to define here too. But it is both a political and spiritual practice. And by spiritual, I mean how you connect to yourself, others, and this planet. Like that undercurrent, right? And so I think for me personally, I really tried to approach rest from a very practical, it's burnout, like in 2020, 2021. And I'm really starting to lean into the deeper end of the pool here in terms of returning energy, attention, and time to yourself as a political and spiritual act and practice, because we live under systems that are predicated on our labor and don't give a damn about our rest.
Oh, isn't that the truth?
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm very uncomfortable with people who talk about rest while never acknowledging labor. In the same way that, I call myself the radical joy coach because I believe rest is your vehicle to joy. I'm very wary of people who talk about joy but can't talk about grief or trauma, because there's a relationship there. So yeah, rest is the energy, attention, and time that you return to yourself. It's a reframe. I think it's a reframe that leads to this really beautiful restorative reclamation in a way of we can talk about attention all day long. What attention do we give out daily that we're not even clocking? What energy are we giving to our relationships, our neighbors, our friends, people in our community, people at work that we are not returning to ourselves? Have you ever had days where you get to the end of the day bone tired, even though you don't feel like you did anything that day?
Yes. Like yesterday.
Right? And you're just like, oh, I didn't even do anything. But then like if you were to look back at and name it, you had a conversation where you really listened, like actively listened to a friend talk about something hard that they're going through. Or you helped a stranger at the grocery store get something, blah, 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 because you had that like voice in your head that like, oh, don't ignore them, like go and like, you know what I mean? And those aren't bad things. But if you were to count all the ways that you care and count all the ways that you give, and count all the ways that you serve, and ultimately under that labor, you would begin to see like, oh, I'm discounting my labor. Of course, I'm not getting enough rest.
Yeah, what I really love in your definition as you're talking about it, that I didn't even see when I first read it in one of your workshops or heard it in one of your workshops, is I think what is implicit in your definition is that this definition is for people who are already doing a lot of emotional labor. They are already doing a lot of care work. And that means it's for the people whose energy, time, and attention is already out there in the world for others. I love what you're saying about this gesture of returning. I think there are people out there who they just straight up need to learn how to give energy, attention, or time to anyone else, right? And many of them are socialized into believing they don't have to give that to anybody else. Some people have just personalities of that nature, perhaps, but like there are plenty of people who need to learn how to give or to care. But I think the reason your definition resonated with me so much and just felt so immediately like an exhale, like a sense of relief, like washed over my body, was because it acknowledged all of the output that's already happening, all of the giving that's already there, and how to return it without telling me that I shouldn't give or that I shouldn't care, right? I think there's this bothness, and that gets into what you said around the way that if we talk about rest, we have to talk about labor. If we talk about joy, we have to talk about grief. Like they come hand in hand. These are all spectrums or two sides of the same coin, depending on what metaphor we want to use. But I'd like to hear more about this relationship between labor and rest for you, because I feel like I hear a lot of people talk about it sort of like work-life balance. And I'm like, I don't at all think you're saying like have balance between rest and labor, but like, can you just tease out that relationship more and how you conceive of it?
When you said work-life balance, this is my struggle on LinkedIn because I really am like, can I talk like myself on LinkedIn? Because I would say some different things. When people talk about work-life balance, is that a term that I bristle at a little bit? Mainly because I think when people hear balance, they hear a static definition of balance. They think 50 over here and 50 over there. But if you've ever looked at like, and I'm a Libra, those scales balancing, or if you've ever looked at like a seesaw, it is constantly recalibrating. I don't want to say tension because that makes people uncomfortable, but I think of like liquid equilibrium, like it's doing this over and over and over again. And I think the more we can change the way that we see balance away from being this like static thing of like, it's 50 over here, it's 50 over here. Or when I think about all the demands I have in my life, each will get an equal portion. That is not how human beings work. If we can think of it as more of a fluid thing, then our relationship between how we labor and how we rest can become a lot more beneficial, away from something where we're just discounting our labor to the point where we don't understand why we're tired. And that was a phenomenon I feel like I really witnessed a lot growing up as an Army brat. And a lot of, at the time, spouses were women. It's changed a little bit now as the military has diversified, which I think is a good thing, obviously. But at the time when I lived in Korea, my dad got an assignment to South Korea, and there's no like remote work, right? Like you just didn't have a career because you're moving to a whole different country. You do not have friends and family yet. And the amount of times that I saw women kind of like let the mask fall and cry while talking to other women, or just like the ways it would come out, and we kind of would all like kind of nod, kids too, just kind of like nod that like, oh, they're just having a moment, a totally normal moment where like you're just giving so much, and oftentimes so much to the legacy of someone else without much or any credit. There was a lady whose husband was a higher ranking officer, so we had different housing like up in the hills that was like really lovely, and she was so sweet, very obviously wanted a child. For whatever reason, they didn't have any. And from time to time, she would babysit me. And I love going to her house because she had the best snacks and she had a huge house and she would just like let me do whatever. She was just a nice, lonely lady. And the last time I went, I remember like finished up my homework, and I think she had some soap opera on in the background. And her husband came home and he looked at me and he looked at her and he looked at me and he looked at her. And there was no like meanness or cruelty coming my way. He just kind of looked exhausted when he looked at her, like, oh, we're doing this again. And I remember clocking that immediately, being like, time to pack my backpack. My mom's on the way. I don't need to be here for whatever's coming. And she was like, oh, everything's okay. And I was like, don't worry, I'm putting my stuff up. You're good. Y'all go do whatever you need to go do. And as I made my way to the door, I remember I could hear like them going back and forth, and the conversation was really heated, but it was muffled. And right before I walked through the door, I heard her scream, I have done everything for you. And then it was very quiet. I was like, oh my God, I don't want the door to close on this part. It was super quiet. And he responded so coolly, so calmly, I didn't ask you to. I just remember being like, I gotta go. I can't be, I'm only like 9 or 10 years old, but I know that I don't need to be in this house. I think about that all the time when I think about the concept of discounting your labor. In many ways, women, femmes, non-binary folks are conditioned to give so much that we don't count it as labor. I don't really like the term invisible labor because I think it, in its own way, kind of creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where we continue to count it as invisible labor when it's not. But we're conditioned to give and give and give and give in ways that other people, particularly straight men, do not understand is labor. They just think, oh, you're just a natural nurturer.
Blech.
Yeah, gross. Oh, you're just like better at like domestic stuff than I am. And these are all learned practices. These aren't things that they don't come natural to me at all. But it's interesting because oftentimes when I worked with folks and we're trying to build this equilibrium with their rest and their labor, the hardest work is getting them to count their labor, is getting them to, one, see all the ways that they give, and two, to themselves privately admit that it counts. When you're so used to your gifts or your labors or your talents or whatever being treated as like, oh, just those things, like not valuable, you then go on to kind of perpetuate that myth that, oh, that's not a big deal. I did 10 plus years in the wedding industry, which really is an anthropological study at this point and should be like a book or documentary series, because the ways that particularly if you are a woman-owned business in the wedding industry, the ways that people extract emotional labor from you, but then just like shriek at you having the audacity to like price yourself sustainably. The amount of times where I've had, the night before the wedding or something, usually if it's in a straight presenting couple, have the bride text me at like 3:00 in the morning. You would never text your caterer, your officiant, any of those other people. But for whatever reason, when it comes to the planner, for whatever reason, when it comes to a woman that's a planner, it's like, oh my God, I'm freaking out, blah, blah, blah. And it's not that I'm touched that you think that I can help. I'm annoyed because I'm going to work a 16-hour day and I need to sleep too.
Yeah.
The prep for a wedding, and it's one of the reasons I'm so grateful I don't do it anymore, it was so much emotional labor. I could not express a negative feeling, even if I had one, because even though I am not the focal point for the event, everybody's kind of calibrating their emotions based off of my reaction. If I look like shit, everybody else is like, what's going on? What's going on? What's happening? Right? I still have to smile and grin and bear it. And obviously for me, that became something that just was not healthy. And so in my own like personal practice, like I have to count the labor. I was like, why am I so burned out after every wedding season? why do I arrive at December? I had an October twitch, I would call it, because I would always like I would start going crazy with stress. Why would I arrive at December like I just got out of a shipwreck and I made it to shore every year? I was like, I'm changing things. This is not healthy. Like, I'm not having a great time. And I had one really bad client experience where at some point I remember looking up to the sky and being like, am I on candid camera? Because everything that could go wrong, that's not my fault, but because I am the planner, is my responsibility to fix. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And that wedding, that was back in 2018, really taught me to start counting the labor that I do in client scenarios and then also looking at it personally. So I think for people who want to kind of create work-life balance or really start to bridge a healthy relationship between their labor and their rest, they have to start with giving an honest assessment of all the labor that they do. When I've had clients who are parents, just doing this activity is enough to make them just like tear up. Just from that role, right?
And I think that's where that sort of 50-50 definition of balance really harms us. There's no spreadsheet that you can calculate, especially parenting labor on. Like there's no calculus for this. There's no equation that's going to like spit out an answer of what your amount of labor versus your amount of rest, quote unquote, should be. And I think because our days have been forced onto clock time, we think we can use minutes and hours to measure it. But minutes and hours are really hollow measurements of time, like in our felt bodies. And something I've seen with my own work around like restorative rest is that sometimes 10 minutes of something that's truly restorative, if I'm doing an equation, like equals 8 hours of me sitting on the couch scrolling on Instagram, which I used to do every weekend, right? So I think that we can't calculate it with time. And that leaves a lot of us at kind of like a loss of like, well, I thought I had 8 hours a day for work and 8 hours a day for sleep and 8 hours a day for everything else. But like that calculus just really doesn't work. It's very ineffective. And I think it sets us up with really problematic expectations for rest.
We were talking earlier about like, what is it, hard 75 hard?
Oh yeah, 75 hard. Yeah.
I think when you try and approach something intuitive with like the same tools and metrics that you would approach something very like logistical, you're always going to kind of set yourself up to fail. The amount of people who come to me and are like, well, I need a sabbatical. And I'm like, do you?
Oh, okay. Real talk. Take us there. Why do you say that?
Because I think everybody thinks that they are so tired that the only way that they can ever feel rested is with a huge, like, they're so dehydrated that the only way that they feel like, okay, I will feel better is if I, drink a lake. No, babes, you'll die. Like you can't handle that. Like it's like swinging from one side of the pendulum to the other. So it's like trying to find what is effective and restful for you. Maybe you do need a sabbatical. Okay. Who is to say that having more time, you're not going to spend it the same way? I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to take a sabbatical and I'm not going to scroll on Instagram or Reddit is the one for me for like 8+ hours. I'm going to do yoga every day. And then I'm going to go take a hike and have a picnic with my partner. And it's going to be like sunshine and rainbows every day. And you're putting this perfection on something, again, that's incredibly intuitive. And it's kind of like with money almost. Like if you can't manage $5, how are you going to manage 5 million? If you struggle with 10 minutes, let's start there before we're like, oh, I need a 6-month sabbatical. And I'm saying this from my own experience. I take a July sabbatical every year. I started in 2021 and every year That thing beats me up. Every year, I'm just like, God, it is restful, but even I have to spend like the first like week kind of working past those barriers and blocks that can make rest something that is intuitive, can make it feel so difficult. And so you might not need a sabbatical. You might just need 10 minutes in a park watching the sunset. You might need, perfect example in May, I had a email subscriber nominate me for, Rachel Cargill did this year of rest thing with postcard cabins for Black creators in 2023. And I had till June of this year to use that one night stay, and I had been avoiding it. And I was like, oh God, let me just use it. So I didn't even think the form was still going to work, but it did. They're like, okay, you're booked. And I was like, oh, now I have to actually go. Okay. Oh, okay, that's fine. One night. And it felt like I had to be reminded of my own practice. But one night, and I felt like I got a year's worth of rest. It was so restorative. And this is something that I have to, and it's why I call myself the Radical Joy Coach, but we start at rest. It was restorative because it was joyful. People miss this part in the practice because they think of rest as simply something that's like woo woo, and I'm going to light some candles and like ascend into Zen and like all the, which is lovely and also just not realistic for the world that we live in, for you to be able to do that every single day. Sometimes the 10 minutes you get is the 10 minutes that you get, right? But it was just fun. It was fun and it was joyful. And I think people have this idea of rest only being this thing for recovery because they think of like when you're sick and you need to rest. That is a form of rest, right? Rest for recovery. It's not always necessarily joyful. When I'm sick and I'm resting because I'm sick, I'm evil. I'm not a good patient. I cannot stand being sick. And I make my minor inconvenience everybody's major inconvenience. I'm horrible when I'm sick. But most people arrive at rest coming from being burned out or coming from a major transition in their life that is scary or difficult or hard. So they think of the period to rest, the period to sit with the discomfort and the uncertainty as a negative thing. And so they never want to approach it again. But rest can also be fun. Rest can be going out with your friends and having like a girls' night out. Rest can be taking a solo trip to a cabin in the woods to write or just like chill. This is in my RestLab 101 class, but there's a slide in the deck of like Cardi B being like, what? There's like rest can also be twerking on a consenting stranger.
Yeah.
It could be having a good time, but I think the key that we miss is we want rest to leave us feeling restored and restful. And you can't really access that unless it's joyful or fun. There's a line between like self-care that's like making a doctor's appointment or going to bed so you get your 8 hours or however many hours you need. That's not always like fun. I'm not jumping for joy when it's time to go to bed. I'm usually like, oh, but I could be scrolling on my phone.
And I'm not like happy when I go to the dentist.
I'm not smiling at the dentist. I'm like, I'm here, you're here. Let's do this thing. Thanks for the floss. But I think there's a line between like rest that is self-care that might not always feel good, but needs to get done, and rest that's really joyful. And I qualify that because of the people that I'm talking to specifically. Bleeding hearts are so good about making sure that everybody else feels loved on, feels celebrated, feels comforted, feels taken care of, is having a good time. We suck at doing that for ourselves.
Yeah. I feel like I needed to hear all of that. Thank you. And I think what's coming up for me is the way that one activity can be restful or not. And sometimes the same activity can be rest sometimes and labor other times. And, we can begin with an example of like caregiving or, being a parent where you're like, sometimes hanging out with your kid is restful. It's joyful. It's energizing. It like brings more energy back to you than you feel like you're giving out. Like it's very regenerative. And sometimes hanging out with your kid is like draining and exhausting. And you are having to give like every ounce of your energy to this other tiny human or teenage human of any size. So I think that's one place this happens. But I'm was thinking of like off the grid listeners here who are small business owners or creators or artists. And like when you're an artist, when you have built a business you love, sometimes or even often working in it can feel restful or can feel regenerative. And then very quickly, it can like slide into not. And so I'm curious if you have any tools or resources or advice for that sort of situation where it's like, well, sometimes painting feels restful and sometimes painting is work. How do you help people kind of navigate those activities that can really feel differently depending on the day?
This is where the intuitive aspect of this really comes into play. Where you labor is where you should rest. That's where you should look first. If you are providing a lot of emotional labor to either your children or a lot of emotional labor at home, that's like a sign of like, okay, those are places where I need to be bolstering that with rest. For creative folks, anytime I work with people who do creative work, especially get compensated for creative work, their livelihood depends on their creative work. The first one I pull up is creative rest. Something that is just for you, just yours, that feels good, that has nothing to do with the work you do. If you're an animator for a show and you love the work that you do, doesn't mean it's any less tiring because you love it. Doesn't mean it's any less exhausting because you're passionate about it. But you spend a lot of time doing that specific type of creative labor. Creative rest, again, energy, attention, and time you return to yourself. What is a creative endeavor that's like just yours? Is there like a zine you want to make that's just like fun that you want to put on Substack? Cool, let's focus on that. Is it the very opposite of that where like you don't want to have any creative output? You just want to kind of like chill, or you want to be around nature, or maybe your creative output is gardening. But I think the first thing is looking at where you labor, assessing where you labor, and using that as the guide to show you where you need to rest. And then also allowing it in the same way that we talk about balance and kind of moving into like a dynamic definition of that. This is intuitive. Just because Monday crocheting was like your vibe, right? And that felt restful. Wednesday, you might not want to touch it. You might want to put those hooks away, and that's fine. I think sometimes the difficulty when it is intuitive is like, man, I've got decision fatigue already. I got to decide on what type of rest I want to do now too. I don't want. And again, that's why I try and qualify like rest that is joyful, because like you said, that could be 10 minutes. That could be that could be 2 vacations a year. That could be, I guess that could be a sabbatical that you take. That could be 1 weekend a month. Trying to find something joyful, trying to do something restful and restorative every day, of course, right? But more than likely, from a day-to-day basis, as we go from professional labor to emotional, all these different types of things that we have to get done in a week, I'm more concerned with you making the space to get some type of rest done during the week to just like sustain you versus trying to be like, okay, I need 3 hours. And like, let's be real. If you have kids and you tell me like, girl, I need 3 hours every day. And I'm going to be like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. And that's not to dissuade you from trying to find ways to rest, but I think there are also people who sell rest as an aspiration, and that can lead people to like kind of chase this ideal form of rest that they haven't even tested. They don't even know if it's restful for them. And I'm really trying to take rest as a spiritual and political act, but also make it a practical.
Yes. I don't know. I'm like, snaps, please.
Because for me, I think I'm really not invested, nor am I interested in a rest or joy that bypasses reality. We've got some tough shit that we're trying to navigate right now that has impacted our family dynamics. We've got family members we might not be talking to right now. Thanksgiving has been stressful for many years. This year, I don't even know. But there are Friendsgivings where I'm like, I might need to decline that invitation. Right. We're living in incredibly stressful times. I'm really tired of unprecedented. We can do precedent at any time we want to start doing that again. That'd be great. It's unreasonable to talk about rest as if like, well, I'm not Buddha. I'm not Jesus. I'm not like, okay, just give up everything and go into the woods. And like, that's not how everybody else works, right? There's a reason there's like one of them every couple hundred of years. The rest of us are like, that's cool, bro. I gotta work. I got kids to feed. I got a dog to feed. Her name is Duchess, and she is diva. We've got things to do, right? We've got art that we want to make. We've got gatherings that we want to put together. We've got communities and causes that we want to pour into. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge rest as a necessity and not a aspiration. One, because again, we're trying to make this like intuitive, spiritual, and tangible thing practical, like so that we actually do it. So we actually practice it. So we actually have this like space in ourselves to return to, because honestly, I don't know how we're going to navigate the ever-growing list of challenges that we need to come up with solutions for if we're not taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other.
Yeah, I'm really hearing that rest is a way we embed ourselves in our reality. It's not a way we escape our reality, because those sort of aspirational, idealized views of rest are very escapist. And, it's interesting. I share your skepticism about sabbaticals, but largely, like, I come from an academic background and was a PhD student and knew lots of professors who took sabbaticals. But I feel like what has happened when sabbaticals got moved out of that context, where most people were first familiar with them, into other contexts, is like people forgot to notice that the purpose of a professor's sabbatical is actually to go do original research, to write the book, to get published. Like, the purpose of the sabbatical is work, but it's meant to be the work that actually feels creative and restful in some instances. It's not the labor of teaching and being a, mentor to your students. Like, it's actually interesting as we're reflecting, just thinking around like the sort of touch point of sabbaticals. There's a way there in which they become this sort of moment where academia acknowledges, like, here's the labor and here's like the creative rest of your job. And so you labor for 7 years and then you get one semester of rest, or, all of the timelines are different now. But I mentioned that to say that, like, this sort of idea, this very aspirational, idealized sense of sabbaticals now, I think has become this like all or nothing way of thinking of like, I'm either working or I'm doing nothing. And like, going on sabbatical doesn't make you a different person. Like, if you don't take a walk any day of your life, you're not suddenly going to start taking walks because you're on sabbatical.
Thank you. So how mine started was in 2021. I had a speed run through 2020 where I was just like, I went from wedding planner, dipped my toe into DEI, quickly dipped my toe out because I was like, none of this is sustainable. I know that pendulum's going to swing again and I don't want to be there when it happens. But like the work kind of turning into the term I love, that's kind of like the crux for everything that I do, rest equity. Like, who historically has been allowed to rest? When we talk about labor laws in the United States, when we talk about Labor Day, and we kind of made it like sanitize it as this cute, like little, oh, it's just like a day off to have fun. But like people died for us to have time off.
Mm-hmm. To have an 8-hour workday.
To have an 8-hour workday and not like send our kids to factories at 4. Like, people died. So I was like speed running through like the framework of this, and I was doing lots of talks, lots of podcast stuff. I was just like launching, just going. And then 2021 hit, and I was like, I need a break. And so I was like, July, I'm going to take a sabbatical, and I'm going to announce that I'm taking a sabbatical. And it was fine. The first one was fine. I needed it. I needed like time off to just kind of breathe. And I've been doing it every year since. And every year it has been different and provided something different for me. But it took the first couple for me to be like, I have ADHD. Unstructured time is hell. Unstructured time means I turn into, what's the name of the little green ghost blob from Ghostbusters? Slime?
Yeah, something like that.
I turn into him, where I'm just like haunting the house. I'm watching way too many British cozy murder mysteries. I'm not really participating in humanity whatsoever. It's not a great time. And it drives me crazy because I'm like, oh, I just feel it doesn't feel restful when you just kind of like stop. And then I started turning it into like this July. I started the book manuscript and like focusing my attention on like what's one thing I really want to give my attention to and kind of give myself a break from on the other stuff. So I think that's a thing. But I think our conversations around sabbaticals have really been rooted in rest as this aspirational thing, which I think is a tool of capitalism. Because so long as you believe your rest is something that can only be achieved through death, sudden traumatic shift in your career, or like some type of traumatic injury that happens to your body, so long as you approach rest from that place, who benefits from that? Because it's not anybody who loves you. The people who are like, oh, Amelia's doing overtime again? Oh, love that. Oh, she's not taking her vacation? Love that. That creative work isn't getting done because the focus is on something else. Oh, yum, 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 yum. Like somebody's benefiting from it, but it's not you.
And I think it's really hard to elucidate that when you are your own boss. A big realization for me in self-employment has always been that like, I can't exploit my own labor. Like that dynamic is actually quite possible. And in fact, quite accurate sometimes. And like I have to work against it because it's so ingrained in me to push past my limits, to work to the point where quite literally, like I've worked through migraines. I work until like my hand goes numb from carpal tunnel. Like these are ways I like literally injure myself in my own working. And I can be kind to myself and say like, well, these are the forces of capitalism. I do have to make money. Things are harder than ever. And also I can be clear with myself that those are decisions and choices that I'm making. And I do have power to do otherwise or to change my habits and behaviors, or most often just to say no to people when they ask me to push a deadline or to speed something up or to take on another project. Like perhaps I can just say no. And like your definition of rest, return that energy, time, and attention to myself. I want to sort of weave in one more piece to our conversation. I feel like we've had a really beautiful conversation about what rest is, about how to think of rest and labor together, about how to reframe rest as joyful instead of the sort of like what somebody once said to me, called it like calm supremacy of rest, where it's like, oh, to rest, it's got to be Zen.
I love that.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it to me, but you should start saying it because it made an impression when they said it. So rest can be active, rest can be joyful. It's about that return of energy, attention, and time, as you've said. And we've even like kind of pulled at the specific challenges that like creative small business owners have with that, and the ways that often it can be really hard to distinguish between labor and rest, or one day doing our work can feel like rest and one day it can feel like labor, and we just have to stay in tune with ourselves and our intuition to identify that. We also had our moment raging about sabbaticals, which I really loved. But I kind of want to wrap us up by just turning to the state of the world and this moment where I'm going to try to be really honest here. I know that rest is radical. People say it to me a lot. I'm on the newsletters of all of the like brilliant, specifically Black women out there who are saying this. Rest is resistance, rest is radical. And then I look around the world and I feel like, how am I supposed to rest when all of this is happening? Like, aren't I supposed to be doing something? And I'm half the time I'm not even doing anything, but I think I get trapped in like denying myself rest because at least if I'm working at something, I don't even know. Maybe I'm just avoiding the world. I'm trying to be really honest about what I think is actually happening in my brain. But like, how are you thinking about rest at the end of 2025? I'm just curious if you could share any personal reflections or advice that you've been offering your clients or others around why rest is radical right now, or anything you want to share or say.
Yes. This year has been an incredibly challenging year mentally and spiritually. In February, we had the measles outbreak in Texas because, of course, we had a measles outbreak in Texas. And it was like 10 minutes away from my house. And I was just having a day where I was like, I can't. My nervous system was non-existent. And I remember audibly saying out loud, like, I need to get off my phone because all I'm doing is like scrolling on Reddit. 2 days later, the battery swelled in my phone, which I didn't even know was a thing that could happen. I kept trying to plug it in, and then every time I took it off, it would go from 100 to 0%. By the way, if your phone starts doing that, don't plug it back in because it could blow up. So don't do that. And I was just kind of like, I'm just leaving it plugged in. But like 2 days later, my phone was just like kaput. And through a comedy of errors, I did not get my new phone until like 4 or 5 days later. When I tell you the best sleep I had in many years, I was more attentive. I was like checking in with people in a way that I wasn't when I have like my phone next to me. And I'm saying all that not to be like anti-phone, but it required me to mentally rest in a way that I hadn't been. And I know that lots of people talk about rest as resistance. And then I think the piece that's missing for people are like, okay, it's like, what's the practice? Like, yes, the ideal of that, love. What does the practice look like? And the reason why I start with rest is because I really believe you cannot have something outwardly that you have not created inwardly. It's a really reflexive process. I spent a good amount of time this year rereading Toni Morrison and Octavia Butler and James Baldwin and Audre Lorde, kind of getting rooted in like, how in the hell? I talked to every elder Black woman that I know, and one of whom is a 92-year-old woman, and I was like, how did you do that? Some of the most joyful people I know have been through hell. How did you do that? How did you contribute to a community? How did you build? How did you do any of those things? And all of this work is predicated on those experiences and that knowledge that I've learned from older Black women and women of color, and that like when shit is bad, and it is very bad right now and scary, you go inward to sustain yourself with the knowledge that you still have to connect to other people. The reason why I start at rest is because when you are a bleeding heart and when you give a damn and you want to see the world be a more empathetic and kind and just place, oftentimes you think you have to do that all by yourself. It's not the case. You have to play the role that you can sustain. Nobody's asking you to be Martin. Nobody's asking you to be Malcolm, right? We need Jordan. We need Amelia. Whatever that gift is, whatever that labor is that you want to contribute to fixing the shit show that is going on outside, right? You have to play the role that you can sustain, and you can't sustain it without rest. Martin Luther King Jr. took many vacations. He had many Sundays where he was chilling with his family at home, having a good breakfast and having a good time. I love looking, and I would encourage anybody listening to do this. Look at pictures of writers, speakers, activists that you really have gotten something from, and try and find pictures of them resting. Audre Lorde couldn't write what she wrote without taking breaks. We can't fight the things that we need to fight without reminding ourselves why we're fighting them. To only be in the grief, to only be in the exhaustion, to only be in the despair is one, to forfeit your hope. Two, exhaust yourself. And again, who benefits from you being like, well, I can't do anything anymore, right? It's not rest to bypass what is happening right now. It's rest to sustain your activity. It's rest to help you get clear enough to know hey, locally, I really want to join a union, or there's a community garden that I really want to be a part of. And learning again, not to discount that labor, not to say, oh man, that's not enough. It is enough. Because again, we're not meant to do these things siloed and alone. We're meant to do them in tandem with each other. So give yourself the grace to take a friggin' break. Recognize that elders took breaks. That's kind of part of the process. And also recognize that you have to play the role that you can sustain, and you cannot sustain the fight without rest. And most importantly, go within to build what you want on the outside, and recognize that requires people, that requires community, that requires conversations with folks who are already organizing at the local level, that requires going within to work on yourself so that you can be in a relationship with other people. But rest so you can hope, rest so you can dream, rest so you can act, rest so you can build, and rest so you can restore, because we're going to need a lot of that.
Thank you so much for that beautiful pep talk, spiritual sermon. It felt like a little bit of it all, which I love. Yeah. And my big takeaway at the end of this is just a reminder that rest doesn't have to mean retreating from the world high up on a mountain to be alone. Perhaps in these moments, we can be best served by resting with other people joyfully, with our beloveds, with returning to those connective moments. And also that many of the artists you mentioned, Toni Morrison, Audre Lorde, I think one of their ways of resting was in their creative work. They returned to their practice to rest, right? We have I'm thinking of Audre Lorde's Cancer Diaries, an act of solace through creativity is also rest. And so we've woven so many beautiful threads here. Thank you so much, Jordan, for this conversation. I think that every single listener will probably be wanting to go deeper with you and your work. So where can they find you, and where would you recommend they begin? Do you have a good paid offering to start with?
Yes, I believe everyone should start with RestLab 101. RestLab is where we practice and play with our rest. And the 101 is a class and a workshop where I walk you through the framework of, what rest is, how we define it, how we work with it, but also begin to give you the pieces that you need to take the radical rest method and build a rest practice that's restful for you. So if you're interested, if you're ready, if you're like, I am tired of being tired, come on down to the RestLab 101 before the end of the year.
Thank you so much again. Listeners, go join RestLab 101. Go check out Jordan's website, listen to Jordan's podcast. All of that will be linked in the show notes. And until next time, I hope to see you off the grid. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go